All right, so you've been digging into a bunch of research all about reading instruction for English learners,
Yeah.
those EL students, grades 4 through 8, middle school.
Middle school, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a lot to take in, right? I mean, there's so much out there. So in this deep dive, we're going to try to do something kind of cool. We're going to pull out like the really essential stuff, the key findings about what actually works, what really helps these students become strong readers across all their subjects.
I like that.
You know, and we're hoping this will give you a clear picture without having to wade through every single study yourself.
That's a great goal because it is so important. The number of ELs in our schools is huge and it's only growing.
Right.
And they have this unique challenge, right? They're trying to learn academic language at the same time they're trying to learn the actual content of their
Yeah,
classes.
it's like double the work almost.
Absolutely. And the data we have shows us this concerning trend. The gap in reading scores between ELs and non-ELs, it tends to widen, right, during these middle school years.
Oh, that's worrying.
It's worrying because we know that has really big implications for their academic success. Whether they go to college, their careers, their whole ability to participate in society.
Absolutely. So to help us navigate this complex topic today, we're going to zero in on a really powerful piece of research, a meta-analysis titled Reading Instruction for English Learners in the Middle Grades. It's by Hall and a few other researchers published back in 2017.
Sure.
Now, meta-analysis is basically a study of studies,
Yeah.
right? It takes a bunch of research projects, puts them all together to give us a more solid understanding of what's going on.
Exactly. It's like a super study in a way.
Yeah, like a super study. And this particular one looked back at almost 20 years of research, specifically those experimental studies and quasi-experimental studies
Right.
that looked at reading instruction, for ELs in those grades 4 through 8.
Mm-hmm.
And they covered a bunch of different academic areas,
Mm-hmm.
social studies, science, math, and of course, ELA, English language arts.
Yeah, makes sense.
So they weren't just focused on like how to teach reading in English class. It was broader than that.
Yeah, much broader.
And get this, it brought together findings from 11 different studies.
11, that's quite a bit.
That's a lot, right?
Yeah?
So that gives us a pretty good foundation for figuring out what's really going on.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that overview, let's dive into those core findings. What did this meta-analysis reveal about what truly makes a difference in reading instruction for these students?
All right, so let's start with the big picture, the overall effectiveness of reading instruction.
Okay, big picture.
When you look at all the different ways they measured reading in these studies, they found an average effect size, what we call a mean effect size of 0.35.
Okay, 0.35. Now, what does that tell us?
Statistically speaking, that means there's a significant positive impact of reading instruction, It's doing something good.
So that's encouraging.
It is encouraging, but here's where things get a little more nuanced.
All right, I love nuance.
They broke down the results based on the type of reading measure used, and that's where we see some interesting differences.
Okay, so what types of measures are we talking about?
They looked at what they call standardized measures and unstandardized measures.
Standardized versus unstandardized.
Right, so think of standardized measures as those big general tests, the kind that lots of schools use to compare students across different schools or programs.
Like those big state tests.
Exactly, those kind of tests. And on those standardized measures, the meta-analysis found a very small effect size, just 0.01.
0.01, so barely anything.
Barely anything, right? But then you have the unstandardized measures, which are usually developed by the researchers themselves, and they're much more closely tied to the specific instruction that's being used in the study.
So like classroom-specific tests, basically.
Yes, exactly. Designed to see if that particular teaching approach is working. And on those unstandardized measures, they found a much larger effect size, 0.43.
Okay, so that's a much bigger difference, 0.43 compared to 0.01.
Huge difference, right?
So it seems like the reading instruction had a more noticeable, immediate impact on the skills and knowledge that were being directly taught and tested in the classroom.
Yes.
But the impact on those broader, more general reading abilities, like what you'd see on a standardized test, that was less clear right away.
Yeah, it seems like it.
So it almost sounds like for teachers who want to see evidence that what they're doing is actually working day to day in the classroom,
Mm-hmm.
they should really focus on those classroom-based assessments.
Yeah, those are going to be much more sensitive to the changes that are happening because of the instruction.
That's a really good point. So it's not just about those big standardized tests. It's about what you're seeing happening in your classroom.
Absolutely. It suggests that the benefits of this focused reading instruction for ELs, they might be easier to spot right there in the classroom when you're using assessments that directly reflect what you're teaching.
It makes sense. It's like you're tailoring the assessment to the actual learning that's happening.
Ah.
And maybe those broader, more general reading outcomes,
Mm.
those might take a bit longer to show up, or maybe they need different approaches to really develop fully.
Could be. That's a good point.
Okay, so beyond just like the overall effectiveness, what did they find out about specific teaching approaches? Like, was there anything that stood out as particularly helpful?
Yeah, there were a few things.
Okay,
For example, they looked at whether focusing on vocabulary was important.
makes sense. Vocabulary is huge.
It is huge, and they compared studies that focused only on vocabulary instruction to those that combined vocabulary with strategies for comprehending what was being read.
So vocabulary only versus vocabulary plus comprehension.
Right. And here's the interesting part. They found a much bigger impact on comprehension when instruction included both vocabulary and reading comprehension strategies.
Okay, so it's not enough to just teach the words. You have to teach how to use them to understand what you're reading.
Exactly. It's like they work together, those two things.
They're intertwined.
Yes. And the effect size for the combined approach was 0.39 compared to just 0.08 for vocabulary instruction alone.
That's a huge difference.
Huge, right? It really highlights how important it is to integrate those two things.
It's not just about knowing the words, it's about knowing what to do with them.
Exactly.
Okay, so they dug into those effective instructional approaches, and they found some common elements, some things that teachers can use no matter what specific curriculum they're following.
Right, some general principles.
Yeah, and one that really popped out was intensive vocabulary instruction. It seems like almost all the studies involve this in some way.
Yeah, almost all of them.
So what did this intensive vocabulary instruction look like in practice?
It went beyond just giving definitions. It wasn't just, here's the word, here's what it means.
Right, it was more than that.
Much more. They really emphasize repeated exposure to new words over time, seeing them again and again.
Okay, so repetition is key.
Repetition is key.
Yeah.
And students got to use these words in different situations, speaking, writing, discussing.
So it wasn't just about recognizing the word, it was about actually using it.
Yes, using it, expressing yourself with it.
That makes a lot of sense.
And they talked about the subtle shades of meaning, the nuances of words.
Oh, that's interesting.
They looked at examples and non-examples, synonyms, antonyms, and importantly for ELs, they looked for connections to their first language through things like cognates.
Oh, right, so using that prior knowledge.
Absolutely. And they also used visual aids a lot, pictures, diagrams, things like that. And they encouraged students to make personal connections to the words.
Oh, I like that. So like making it meaningful to their own life.
Exactly. And it's interesting because the number of new words they introduced each week varied quite a bit across the studies, from like 2 or 3 up to 20.
Wow, that's a big range.
Yeah, a big range. But the median was about 5 words per week.
Okay, so 5 words a week, that seems manageable.
Yeah, somewhere in that range, it seems like a good sweet spot.
So it's not about overwhelming them with a ton of vocabulary. It's about really digging deep into a smaller set of words.
Yeah, making those words really stick.
I like that. Okay, so what about those reading comprehension strategies you mentioned?
Yeah.
Did they find any specific ones that seemed to be particularly effective?
They did, particularly in those studies that combined vocabulary and comprehension instruction, what they called the dual component approaches.
Dual component meaning they hit both vocabulary and comprehension.
Exactly. And in those studies, they used several strategies pretty consistently. One was teaching students to ask themselves questions about the text as they're reading.
Self-questioning.
Yeah, self-questioning helps them stay engaged and think critically about what they're reading.
It's like having a conversation with the text.
Exactly. And they also taught summarizing, how to pull out the main ideas.
Okay, summarizing, that's a big one.
Huge. And then there's comprehension monitoring. That's where students learn to check their own understanding as they're reading, figuring out when they're confused and what to do about it.
That's so important because if you don't know you're confused, you can't fix it.
Exactly. And then there's predicting, making guesses about what might happen next based on what they've read so far.
Oh, I love that. Like keeping them on the edge of their seats.
Yes, and visualizing, creating mental images of what they're reading, picturing it in their minds.
They can really bring the text to life.
It can, and they also encourage students to think about different perspectives, the viewpoints of different characters or the author, and to make personal connections to what they were reading.
So it's about going beyond just the words on the page and really engaging with the ideas.
Right, thinking critically and personally about what they're reading.
Okay, so it's about giving students these tools, these active reading strategies to really dig into the text.
Yes, empowering them to be active readers, not passive readers.
I love that. What other common themes did you see in those effective instructional approaches.
Another big one was active student engagement, making sure students are actively participating in their learning.
Right, not just sitting there listening passively.
Yeah, exactly. The teachers in these studies, they really encourage students to participate through all sorts of activities.
Like what kind of activities?
Discussions, with partners in small groups as a whole class.
Okay, so lots of interaction.
Lots of interaction, and also writing exercises, drawing, and even educational games.
Games, that's fun.
Yeah, making it fun and engaging. And they also emphasized independent reading.
Oh, that's crucial, getting them to read on their own.
Absolutely. It's all about creating a dynamic learning environment where students are actively involved.
It makes sense. We know that students learn best when they're actively doing something, when they're interacting with the material and with each other.
For sure.
Okay, now I'm curious about student motivation. That seems like it would be a huge factor, especially for ELs who are already facing the challenges of learning in a new language.
Oh, it's absolutely critical. And all 11 of the studies in the meta-analysis included some component focused on boosting student motivation.
Okay, so they were deliberate about this.
Very deliberate. The teachers used interesting materials, real-world contexts. They gave students some choices in what they read or how they learned. And they provided lots of opportunities for collaboration, working together.
Oh, I like that collaboration can be so motivating.
It can, and the meta-analysis specifically mentions the 5E teaching model as one way to engage students.
5Es? What are those?
Engage, explore, explain, extend, and evaluate.
Oh, that's a good framework.
Yeah, it's a great way to structure lessons to keep students interested. And then they also talk about anchoring instruction in real-world scenarios, using things like videos and audio.
Making it relevant to their lives.
Exactly, and carefully choosing texts that are interesting and relevant to the students.
That makes a big difference.
It does. Students are much more likely to be engaged if they see the value in what they're learning.
Absolutely. So it seems like creating that supportive, engaging, and relevant learning environment, it's just as important as the specific teaching techniques themselves.
Couldn't agree more. It's all connected.
Now, since we're talking about ELs, I'm wondering, what role did their first languages play in the instruction?
That's a really important question. And a significant number of the studies actually incorporated supports that leveraged the students' first languages.
Okay, so they didn't just ignore the fact that these students come in with existing language skills.
Exactly. They use those skills to their advantage.
How so?
Well, 8 out of the 11 studies used these first language supports in some way.
8 out of 11, so a majority.
Yeah, a strong majority. And they did things like strategically using cognates, those words that have similar origins and meanings in English and the students' native languages.
Oh, yeah, like animal in Spanish?
Exactly. Those are cognates, and they also provided Spanish translations of key vocabulary and sometimes even whole texts.
So it's like giving them a little boost, a little support in their native language.
Right, and sometimes they even offered clarification in Spanish during lessons when needed.
Oh, that's a good idea.
It can really help clear up confusion, and in some cases, they even let students respond in either Spanish or English.
So they had that flexibility.
They did, which can be really important, especially in those early stages of language development.
Yeah. It takes the pressure off a little bit.
It does, and it shows respect for their home language.
Absolutely. So it seems like leveraging those existing linguistic skills can be a really valuable tool in supporting reading development in English.
Definitely.
Now, I know the meta-analysis looked at reading instruction across different subject areas. So did they find that it was more effective in some subjects than others?
This is one of the most interesting findings, actually. The effectiveness of reading instruction did not significantly differ between ELA contexts and content area contexts like science, social studies, and math.
Oh, wow, that's surprising.
It was a little surprising. You might think that reading instruction would be more effective in ELA because that's where they're directly teaching reading skills.
Yeah, you'd think so.
But it turns out that's not the case. It suggests that we can and should be thinking about literacy development across the entire curriculum.
So it's not just the ELA teacher's responsibility.
Exactly. Every teacher has a role to play in helping ELs develop those crucial reading skills.
That's a really powerful message.
It is. It really highlights the importance of collaboration among teachers.
Okay, now for something a little different, the meta-analysis also looked at the quality of the research studies themselves.
Right.
What did they find there?
This was a somewhat unexpected finding. They found that higher quality studies tended to show smaller effects.
Smaller effects. That's counterintuitive.
It is a bit, you'd think that better studies would lead to stronger results.
Yeah, you would.
But it seems like that wasn't always the case, especially on those unstandardized measures we talked about earlier.
So the ones that were more closely aligned with the instruction.
Right, and they assessed study quality based on things like having a larger sample size, using measures that weren't directly tied to the instruction, and having a rigorous research design with random assignment of students to different groups.
Okay, so those are all good things, right? Those are signs of a strong study.
They are, but they seem to have led to more conservative results.
Hmm. So why do you think that might have been?
Well, the meta-analysis offers a few possible explanations. One is that higher quality studies tend to have more rigorous designs, which can lead to more realistic estimates of the true effect.
So maybe those smaller, less rigorous studies were a little inflated.
It's possible they might have been more susceptible to certain biases.
Okay, that makes sense.
Another possibility is that the comparison groups in those higher quality studies were getting better instruction themselves.
Oh, so the control group wasn't just doing nothing.
Right, they were still getting some good teaching, which might have made the difference between the treatment and control groups less dramatic.
So it's not that the reading instruction wasn't working, it's just that the comparison group was also doing well.
Exactly. And then there's the idea that those standardized measures, which were more common in higher quality studies, they just tend to show smaller effects overall.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
So it's a complex picture, but the takeaway is that we always need to consider the strength of the evidence when we're looking at research findings.
So even if a study says, hey, we found this huge, amazing effect, we have to look at how the study was done and take that into account.
Absolutely. We can't just blindly accept the results.
Good point. The meta-analysis also looked at whether things like how they define EL status in the studies,
Yeah.
or the total amount of instruction that they called the dosage,
Uh-huh.
whether those things had an impact on the effectiveness. And surprisingly, they found that neither of those factors, as they were measured in these studies, made a significant difference in the outcomes.
Yeah, that was interesting.
But they did point out that the way they categorized EL status in those original studies might have been a bit oversimplified.
Right.
You know, it might not have captured all the nuances of the different backgrounds and experiences within the EL student population.
Yeah, there's a lot of diversity within that group.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's a reminder that we need to be really careful about how we define and categorize students.
And that we need more research that really digs into those individual differences.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Hmm.
We've talked about the overall effectiveness of reading instruction,
Yeah.
those specific teaching strategies that seem to work well,
Uh-huh.
the importance of first language support,
Right.
the fact that literacy development can happen across all subjects,
Yeah.
and even some of the complexities of the research itself.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. But for you, our listener who's been with us on this deep dive, you know, you're here to really understand what helps ELs succeed in middle school reading.
Yeah.
So what does all this mean for you? What are the key takeaways?
Well, the research really points us in a few key directions.
Okay, tell me more.
First, it tells us that we need to focus on rich and in-depth vocabulary instruction.
Vocabulary is foundational.
It is, but it's not enough on its own. We have to integrate that vocabulary instruction with the explicit teaching of reading comprehension strategies.
So it's both and.
Both and it's
Right.
not just about teaching those things, it's about actively involving students in their learning.
Right, making it engaging.
Exactly, paying attention to their motivation,
Mm.
creating that supportive and engaging learning environment, and whenever possible, drawing on their first languages as a resource.
That's such a good point, using what they already know.
Absolutely. And we can't forget that literacy development isn't just for ELA class.
It's everyone's responsibility.
Exactly. It needs to be happening in all subject areas.
And even though the findings about study quality,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they make us think a little bit critically about some of the research, it's still encouraging to see that even those really rigorous studies, they're showing us that targeted reading instruction can make a difference for these students.
It gives us some real hope.
Yeah,
Yes.
it does. So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that we've uncovered some valuable insights.
For sure.
But like you always say, good research, it often leads to more questions.
Oh, absolutely. It opens up new avenues for exploration.
So what are some of those areas where we need more research?
Well, the authors of the meta-analysis, they point out that we need more high-quality research specifically on how reading instruction impacts things like content knowledge acquisition and writing outcomes for ELs.
That makes sense. We need to know how it all fits together.
Yeah, how it all connects and how we can best support these students in all areas of their academic development.
So on that note, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to ponder.
Okay.
Given that effective reading instruction doesn't seem to be limited to ELA classes, what are some practical ways you can imagine these strategies being used in other subjects, like science, social studies, or math?
I like that.
Think about how those approaches could have a ripple effect and really benefit these students across the board.
Yeah, it's a great challenge to consider how we can make literacy a truly integrated part of the entire school experience.
I love that idea. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you a clearer, more concise understanding of this really important research.
It's been a pleasure.
And who knows, maybe we'll dive into some of those related topics in the future.
I'm always up for another deep dive.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks again.